think we can get started whenever everybody's ready.
Yeah, maybe real quick, we can just go around and introduce ourselves while we're getting a few more people to tune in. So I'm Steve Stewart, and I'm chair of the commission, and I will ask the next person to pick another person. So I see on my screen Steven Sprick Schuster. Would you introduce yourself and introduce whoever you see next?
All right, sorry. Yes, my name is Steven Sprick Schuster. I'm a professor of economics at Middle Tennessee State University. I'm one of the authors of the report that we're talking about today. And next will be John Feaster III.
Good morning, everybody. John Feaster, Deputy Assistant Secretary for the Maryland Department of Labor, and I'll pass it to Rochelle.
Good morning, everyone. Rochelle Rubin, Director of Correctional Education in the Department of Labor, and I will pass it to Lucy.
Good morning, everyone. Lucy Steinitz. I'm a member of Major and AVP volunteer, and I'll put it out there. I'm looking to be an adjunct in one of the prisons, perhaps in the spring semester. And I will pass it to Ann Bocchini-Pack.
Good morning. I am Ann Bocchini-Pack. I am a co-founder and director of advocacy for Prepare. And I will, let's see, I think, Mr. Denny, have you spoken yet?
I have not. So my name is Andrew Denny. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga, and I'm one of the co-authors of this paper. And I'll pass it to the other co-author, Ben Stickle.
Hello, good morning, everybody. My name is Ben Stickle. I'm also a professor of criminal justice. I work at Middle Tennessee State University, one of the co-authors of the paper. And I can't see anybody else's names on my screen, so I'm not sure who to ask to go. Wait, I see somebody. Elizabeth.
Hi, Delegate Elizabeth Embry, Baltimore City, 43A, member of the commission. And I will pick Danielle.
Danielle Cox, Director of Education for Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services, assigned to the Commission for the Secretary of Scrubs designee. Let's go with Alyssa.
Hi, everyone. My name is Alyssa Feel. I'm an education attorney with the Office of the Public Defender. I'm not sure who hasn't gone yet, but I'm going to guess maybe Amanda Owens hasn't gone since I just saw her name pop up.
Correct. Hi, everyone. Amanda Owens with the ABLE Foundation. And I just joined, so I have absolutely no idea who to pass to. If maybe someone could just pop up.
I can go. This is Andrea Cantora from the University of Baltimore. I'm an associate professor of criminal justice, and also I direct our Second Chance College program at Jessup Correctional. Did Christian go?
Not yet. Thank you, Andrea. My name is Christian Gant. I'm an assistant attorney general from the Office of Attorney General, also representing the Maryland Equitable Justice Collaborative. I will turn it over to, I don't believe Gordon spoke yet. Have you?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Gordon Pack. I am a formerly incarcerated person who was basically educated in the prison system. I earned my GED there. I earned my AA degree there. I was working towards my bachelor's there, and a number of vocational programs as well. But I also serve in the past as an education clerk, college clerks, and everything deal with education, a lit lad tutor, the whole 9 yards. But I'm working as a parole advocate for Prepare and a reentry coordinator for the University of Maryland in Baltimore. I'll pass it to everybody on my screen. Let me go to another page or something. Wow.
Here, I can go.
Okay.
I'm Judy Lichtenberg. I've been teaching in prisons in Maryland for almost 10 years, and I'm on the board of Major and Prepare, and I'm chair of the Advisory Stakeholder Commission to the Commission. No, the Advisory Stakeholder Committee to the Commission, which oversees the 3 work groups, which we'll talk about in a little while. And I will pass it to, I think Meredith just got on.
I think Meredith left the call. Maybe Diana? Or maybe Jessica, if you want to go.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Dr. Jessica Johnson, and I'm the Deputy Director of Correctional Education, and I'll pass it to Ben.
I don't know if there's another Ben, but I already went. Sorry.
I'm sorry. What about Josh?
Hi, my name is Josh Weinstock. I am a policy analyst for the General Assembly in the Department of Legislative Services. And I will pass it to, has Stephen gone?
Me? I sort of introduced myself, yes.
Sorry, the other Stephen.
I think, yeah, I've gone as well.
All right, okay.
Has anyone not gone?
I'm looking over the list. I think we got just about everybody. We have an AI thing called John's Note Taker, but we can't introduce that. Arinze.
I can introduce myself. I'm Mary Gable, representing State Superintendent with Maryland State Department of Education. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. I didn't see your name on the list. Arinze.
Hey, folks. Arinze Fukuche, Director of Communications, Deputy Legislative Director at GoCap.
Okay, I think we got just about everybody, and a few more people will join us for the sake of our presenters in a little while. This commission has 25 people on it, and it represents all the relevant cabinets that, public safety, labor, education, the University of Maryland system, higher education. We have 5 people who were formerly incarcerated on this commission, who are now working, doing terrific things. And myself, I worked for the state and retired and ran the academic part of the correctional education program for years. And I also was Correctional Education Association Executive Director for 29 years. So that's basically my background. And so we have a lot of people here who have been working just for you 3 guys, again, doing our presentation. We've been working for, I guess it's going on a year now. We started this meeting, and we have put together an interim report, and now we're working toward an annual report, which goes to the legislature. And we have 3 delegates on this on this commission, and some of them want to introduce some legislation pertinent to some of the things we've discovered that might need to be corrected or looked at. So, with that, Ainsley, will you take over with the notes? Ainsley is you need to introduce yourself, Ainsley. Ainsley sort of keeps us all working and keeping us together.
Hi, I'm Ainsley. I am the Policy and Legislative Manager for the Governor's Office of Crime Prevention and Policy, and I'm the staff person for this commission. I'm a little sick, so if I sound a little off today, that's why. But here is our agenda. And if we want to go over to the meeting minutes of last time, so we can approve those.
Presumably everybody had a chance to look them over. We save all our minutes. They're in the Dropbox. And so Ainsley is really good at putting these things together afterwards. We record the meeting, and then we have a repository for everything. So you can always go over things. Does anybody have any particular thing that they've seen in the minutes that seems to need correction, or maybe something was missed or whatever? If not, pardon?
I said no, but I moved to approve if
There you go. That's what I was going to ask for. Thank you, Danya.
Second.
Okay, so the meeting minutes have been approved, and so Ainsley, do you want to go over, please, the process you developed for developing our recommendations?
Yes, so our annual report is due in November, and that report is going to be the report that has recommendations from the commission. So far the work groups are working on those recommendations. We are set to, we're going to have any people from the work groups, send in those recommendations by the end of September, so we can see those recommendations and vote on them on the end of September. In October, those work groups will work on the issue descriptions for those recommendations for that annual report. So in the next couple of months, October, the commission is going to see those recommendations and vote on them. And then in November, those recommendations, we're going to vote on the issues in the final report, kind of like we did for that interim report. So if anybody does have recommendations that they would like to put forth as part of this commission's work, please let me know as soon as possible. We really want those done at least by the end of September, if not sooner. Because the annual report is due in November, October, we're not really going to have time to, sit down and really look through any recommendations that thoroughly. So please, if you have any recommendations you'd like to make on behalf of this commission, send them in, as soon as possible to me, so we can get those started in the work groups, and get those, solidified by the end of September.
Good. And this is for our guests. This is a 5-year commission now. This is our first annual report. So there's be some things that we haven't gotten to yet we have a list of things that we will look at in the future that we haven't done yet. And so this is our first really substantial thing that's going to go to the governor and to the legislature. That's where this report goes. It goes to the Speaker of the House, the President of the Senate, and to the governor. Okay. So that's I was thinking you would put up the rubric, but you did that last time, Nancy, so that's fine. So we're going to go with the work group updates, and Judith Lichtenberg, who is the chair of the 3 work groups. And for our guests, the commission meets once a month, but we broke into 3 areas: correctional, career technology, higher education, and then the third one is ABE, GED, special ed. And those groups are doing the grunt work, let's say, for the commission. Many of the commissioners are on these groups, and then some of the people who are not on the commission have been pulled into this group from the Maryland Equitable MAGJD. I never get it right. Maryland Equitable Justice. Is that what it is? I'm sorry. That's it. Okay, thank you. And so the people who are on the work groups have been acting on behalf of the commission, and then they make recommendations and the commission accepts them or not, So with that, Judith, would you please?
Well, I don't really need, you pretty much did it for me, but so we have 3 work groups. And let's say the first one is ABE, GED, SPED. For anybody who doesn't know, that's adult basic education, GED, and special ed. And the chairs of that work group are Danielle, Steve, Ainsley. So I will let one of them report on progress of that committee or subcommittee or work group or whatever it's called.
I'll go last. So Ainsley, Danielle, we have 5 minutes. That's the most, right?
Yeah, 5 minutes for each group.
I'm happy to do a little report out from our last meeting. We talked a lot about technology, the current state of technology. Danielle and Dr. Johnson gave us, since there's a lot of shutdowns that we can't really, it's not really part of this commission to, deal with the officer shortage. Virtual learning has been a really big focus. So they gave us an update on technology. We also moved our ABE, GED, special education work groups to the end of the month, so they're not going to be right after the commission meetings anymore. They're right at the end of the month. They're following the same process as all of the work groups. If anybody has any recommendations, get them in by September. At the end of September, we'll look over those recommendations and approve them. And in October, we'll write out the issue report for all of those issues. We are taking a look at special education. We're looking to get another special education expert on board at the commission. We are looking at, implementing a different certificate process for special education students who may not be able to get a GED or are transferring from high school and have a lot of credits, but, you know, might have to start over in the GED process. So that's one of the recommendations we're looking at in terms of special education.
Hey, Danielle, do you want to take a minute or two, and then I'll finish up with a minute or two? Or anything you want to add?
No, I think Ainsley pretty much covered what we talked about.
Okay. I would just like to emphasize that the biggest portion of what we did early on was data collection. And that, as a result of that, the labor and public safety, we've kind of elucidated what was possible, and we've really gotten, I think, a better organization and more items that are going to be reported out monthly by the system and by institution. That includes attendance, enrollment, wait list, and now capacity, because how big are the classrooms and how full are they? We need to know that. I think we've done, some of our work has been just, you know, we make a recommendation, but some of it is already being done because labor picked up and public safety picked up on some stuff we found. So I think that I'll leave it at that. There are a lot of, we have a whole list in our interim report of things that this committee has come up with, and we're going to pick some of them for recommendations, and others will continue to be issues that we work on for the future. So Judith, I'll turn it back to you.
So let's hear now from the Higher Education Committee, which is chaired by Andrea Cantora, who runs the Second Chance Pell Grant program at Jessup through the University of Baltimore, where she also teaches.
Great. Thanks, Judy. Yes, so our subgroup on higher ed and prison met the end of August for our monthly meeting, and we had guests from Virginia and New York join and present on their wide efforts. So we had the Virginia Consensus for Higher Ed and Prison, and then the SUNY, which is the State University of New York Office of Higher Ed and Prison. So they gave really great overviews of how they're kind of operating. SUNY's Office of Higher Ed and Prison, I think, might be the only office of higher ed and prison under a state university system. So they shared how that became to be. And they provided a lot of information of how they kind of are the main entity that oversees training faculty for all the colleges in the state, professional development. They do a lot of good work, and they're expanding, as well as Virginia's Consensus is also expanding access in prisons out in Virginia. So that was great. At the end of this month, at our next meeting, we'll have Tennessee present on their coalition. I think it's just Tennessee that's joining us this month. Yeah. So the point of all this, and you can watch, I think, our meeting at the end of August was recorded. So if you want to hear those presentations by SUNY and Virginia, that's available if you want to get more information on that. The point of all of this, inviting other states in to learn from them, is because I think one of our recommendations is to create a statewide coalition around this work for higher ed and prison, as a way to become a bit more organized and perhaps be able to go after large foundation grants, which seems to be the common trend around the country. States that have these kind of system-wide coalitions are able to access grant funding and then share out that grant funding with colleges doing the work on the ground. So that's one of our recommendations. Two more I will share is, I mentioned this last time we met, is looking at ways to get incarcerated students, college students, access to state financial aid. So that's one of our recommendation areas. And then our last one is capacity in space. We've been talking about this for a while, and I think our recommendation is going to be geared more towards studying capacity for higher ed and prison in Maryland, and really trying to understand, how many students the programs can serve within the space that they have access to. I know most of the programs have wait lists, and they're quite long. So it's going to be perhaps looking at wait lists and time to get into programs, and how many students we can serve, and learn barriers to serving students as it pertains to space and resources. And I will also share, because I'm not sure if this came up last month, is around the issue of space, just to share something happening with Goucher, and Meredith and Danielle can jump in when I say something wrong. But Goucher, just a lot of people know this, they just implemented 2 trailers at the women's prison as a way of expanding access to women at MCIW. And they're actually, this allows them to have like a day program and for women there to go full time, which is also connected to this new incentive that the Department of Public Safety, thank you, Danielle, has been working on, is getting a college student job assignment where college students can be assigned, that could be their work job, and they can get paid and get good time credits. So that's happening at Goucher. We're really excited. The other colleges are excited to see how that works, because this could be a potential solution for other prisons throughout the state in terms of being able to serve more. Yeah, I think that's everything. Ainsley, Danielle, feel free to add more. We're good.
Good job.
Okay, so let's hear now from Diana Bailey, who heads the Workforce Development and Career Technology subgroup.
Good morning, everyone. Our work group has met on and off over the summer months, and I think part of the main thing, of course, was the site visits to see the occupational programs, particularly what was available in Western Maryland at RCI and MCTC. We also went to the women's prison. I was not able to go to ECI, and there are no occupational programs at JCI, except for a peer mediation credential. So it was a sort of a non-traditional area. The other thing that Ainsley spent a lot of time for us on was looking at a review state by state of their credentialing options and what's approved and what's not. So again, that may be another model for Maryland as we're looking at what other best practices from other states. We're going to be meeting with the state occupational coordinator soon to talk about more details of proposed programs, programs that could be synthesized, that could be, one of the concerns is that are the occupational programs related to workforce outcomes and credentials or not? So just trying to strengthen that linkage. And we also, through our site visits, saw some really interesting, well-done programs. We saw some computer-generated and simulator-generated training programs that was a way to deal with options. But again, looking at, are those long-term options and access to those programs, who gets them and how long can they be there? We also saw a number of security limitations for a number of the occupational programs, but some of them were not consistent. So for example, the barbering program obviously has scissors, but yet in other programs, other implements of the occupation were not allowed. So is that a barrier to employment? Is that a barrier to occupational completion or not? So those were just some of the things that we looked at. And I think that covers, in general, that covers most of what we've been looking at for the last month or so. Any questions?
I just thought that, Diana, that's great. I just thought those visits were highly instructive. Like the cosmetology teacher, one of the facilities said he could teach, they can only complete 600 hours, which doesn't give them their full license. And so they have to get out and do another 200 or 300. And he could give those instructions, because that's with chemicals in hair and all that stuff, dyes, I guess, bleach, whatever you, and it's verboten. You can't bring those chemicals in. But on the other hand, people have scissors. And about the occupational skills, talking with guys standing there with a hammer and a saw right next to me. I mean, I worked there for years. I'm not afraid of that. But so what's dangerous and what isn't? I mean, looking at some of the prohibitions, maybe they can be changed, and you can have a full program, stuff like that. So those are little things we're uncovering as we go around.
Okay, I think that concludes this item on the agenda, if nobody has any questions.
Okay, I want to ask, thank you, Judith. Judith does all our editing too. She's a very humble person, and you know, we have, and
That's
well, I just need to be humble to me. I don't know if everybody else knows you, but I think I know you pretty well by now. For the sake of our presenters, most of the people, good number of people have direct experience either running programs or have experienced them themselves. And we have delegates who are really interested. Some of them are educators and have so they understand education and they're looking at this setting. So I've been really impressed with all the people from labor, public safety, and all the other places people have come from for this commission. They're hardworking people and are donating their time. This is all voluntary, and this is a governor's commission, so it has a high level. I mean, hopefully the governor will listen to what we have to say. But so what you guys are going to tell us today is important. So Ainsley, I want to hand it over to you to introduce these fine young professors.
Well, we're so excited to have them, and they're welcome to introduce themselves. I know they did before, but we have some wonderful presenters today. They have come out with a recent article where they are measuring prison education across states, looking at best practices, the different prison education offerings in each state. So as we kind of broaden our commission's focus, not just on the specific programming of like each, ABE, career technology, but prison education as a whole, we're super excited to hear from them and what they have to say and what they've learned from their research, going from state to state to learn about the different education offerings nationwide. So I will let them introduce themselves, and I'll also drop in the chat the link to their presentation, their different reports that they've done. They were sent out beforehand, so hopefully everybody had a chance to review them.
Thank you. So my name is Andrew Denny, and I'm an assistant professor at the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga. And are we going to be able to present on our screen? Oh, there we go. Okay, I see it now. And before we begin, how much time roughly are we allotted? Because we don't want to overshare or overstate our well.
We have about normally we have about an hour, so we have a half hour. And
okay.
Sometimes we go farther, longer if whoever wants to stay, but go ahead.
Okay, awesome. So what we're going to be talking to you about is our presentation on measuring prison education across states, which was the development of a national scoring system. So you can go ahead and move to the next slide. So as I'm sure you all know, if you look out like throughout American history, education has been really a hallmark of American corrections. Really the first true American correctional facility was the Walnut Street Jail, where it provided vocational training and some very basic education, but compared to what other countries were doing at the time, it was truly revolutionary. And if you look throughout basically the history of American corrections, it's kind of like a pendulum swinging from being very focused on rehabilitation to very punitive. And it goes back and forth depending on, national policies, state level policies, world events as well. And eventually, though, what has happened, as you all are very well aware of, in the late 1970s and early 1980s, you had the Get Tough on Crime movement. And basically what that did was, at a very large scale level, kill a lot of these educational opportunities that were provided to inmates at the state and federal level. But the good news is what has happened is basically over the last decade, there's been kind of a resurgence of prison education, especially funding for prison education, which has led to a lot more opportunities for inmates. And the other interesting aspect of that too is it's very bipartisan in a lot of ways. And what I mean by that is that, you can be pro-offender, right, which is oftentimes what it gets labeled in the media. But what ends up happening is it doesn't matter if somebody's, Democrat or Republican, everyone wants to save money. And what the research continues to show is that if you invest in education, both vocational education and all the other forms that we're going to discuss, it saves money in the long run for the state. And it also drastically improves the chances of success for everyone that takes a part of that. And as I mentioned, since 2015, basically, there's been a huge resurgence, one of which is the Second Chance Pell Experimental Sites Initiative, or SCP. And if you look at some of the research that's come out from that, from like 2016 to 2022, over 40,000 incarcerated people have been able to access Pell Grant funding. And this is only expected to rise. since in 2023 you have the designation of prison education programs. And what has continued to show both in the general public and also amongst those that are incarcerated is the number of individuals who have earned high school diplomas is increasing and has been increasing over the last couple of decades. The only problem with that is if you look at bullet point, I think it's number 4, there has, of course, been a drastic increase in the general public's obtainment of a high school diploma, but that same increase is really not seen for those that are incarcerated. So there's still giant gaps in who is kind of benefiting from these increases in earning official, education like a high school diploma. And then the disparities are even stronger, especially once you get to vocational degrees and other things as well, especially college degrees. And you can also move to the next slide. So basically, kind of in a nutshell here, is that all of the research just about shows that there's nothing really but benefits for offering prison education. And we're, again, going to go through the different types of education here in just a second. But generally speaking, lowers recidivism. It saves money in the long run, especially when you reduce recidivism. You're not going to have that continued revolving door of recidivism being about 66% of people roughly within 3 years of their release returning, and 75% within 5 years. And it's going to lower that. It's going to also increase, productivity as far as people being able to get jobs and, contributing to the economy and everything else related to that as well. So what we wanted to do in our overall goal of this study was to systematically evaluate the current state of educational programming in U.S. prisons. And we also wanted to develop a scoring system that will help rank states based on their educational offerings and their policies. So within this, we have 2 different objectives. One is to examine the extent and the variation of educational programming in the U.S. And by this, we're going to identify some disparities in access across different facility types and jurisdictions and regions. And then the second objective is to assess the impact of these programs on inmate educational participation and how institutional policy and other factors might influence engagement as well. So with that, I'm going to turn this over now to one of my co-authors, who's the first author on this paper, which is Stephen Sprick-Schuster from Middle Tennessee State University.
Sure. Thank you so much, Andrew. So how do we do this? Right, we used 2 surveys, both of which are getting a little old and creaky at this point. So there's a 2019 Census of Correctional Facilities. Now I'm going to point out something out right now before I forget, because I just looked it up last night. It's not on the slides. The Bureau of the BJS is currently collecting data for the next census. Right. So one of the big things and one of the complaints we've heard from states is, why did we do so poorly on educational offerings? We offer these programs that you're saying we don't offer. Well, it looks like you didn't respond to the questions in the survey or in the census, right? So, and actually that was one of the points that I know Ben has been, he highlighted early on. I think one of the best things this can do initially is push states to actually respond to the data collection process, right? And so that's really low-hanging fruit. I believe the data collection process is still ongoing. It started in 2024, but we're anticipating another publication probably in 2026. So we'd love to update the paper then and show that, these states are doing better because they're answering the questions more, right? So little shout out to that. There's bad news is the 2016 survey of prison inmates. There's no indication that there's going to be an updated version of that. I could be wrong, but there's no evidence that there's been funding allocated for an updated version. But that's where some of our data, when it comes to who's actually taking what. Because of how old that data is, we rely on it significantly less, as you'll see in a minute. And then we hand collected. I had a few undergrads help me in trying to determine in finding a couple policies with regards to states, which I'll talk about in a minute. And we also used data from the National Conference of State Legislators for some of our data. All right, next slide, please. All right, so we divided this into 3 research areas. So first, we want to know whether offering vocational education actually leads to increased participation. I think to most people on this call, that's going to seem pretty obvious, but I know that I've gotten some pushback here in Tennessee, and I think it's a really important question. It's, well, we don't want to just open up a bunch of empty classrooms, right? So first of all, is there evidence that offering more education actually leads to higher uptake, which I'll show that it does, right? So what strategies can states employ to enhance occasional offerings and inmate participation? And then finally, where do states rank when it comes to basically 4 broad categories of prison education? So we have literacy and adult basic education, secondary education, vocational training, and college education. Obviously, there's a much larger breadth of it, but I'll explain why we divide it into those 4 sort of silos in just a minute. All right, next slide, please. All right, right off the bat, does availability translate to participation? So we combined data from that census, from that survey of prison inmates, and compared it to the census of correctional education, or the census of correctional facilities. And the best question we were able to use, because it matched really well on both, was vocational education. So do states where there is an increased availability of vocational education actually see an uptake? And so this is a scatter plot that shows you that the dotted line moving up shows that yes, in fact, increased availability of vocational education actually does lead to an increased uptake. So you could say that a 10 percentage point increase in vocational education availability, right, going from, let's say, 30% of inmates having vocational education in their prison to 40%, that will lead to about a 2 percentage point increase in the number of prisoners that are actually taking it. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so then we looked, back one. We looked at what is being offered, all right? So the census actually asks 8 specific questions. And so, okay. So there is literacy training, adult basic education, vocational education, college, ESL, special education, and study release. Okay, so I'm going to spend just a second talking about the data and why I'm maybe anticipating some questions you all may have about why we ignored some things or why we combined certain things. We found that in the responses, some prisons or some education or some prison systems clearly combined literacy and adult basic education. Like I think Kansas said that all their prisons had one and they didn't have any of the other, right? So it seemed in the response rates that there was quite a bit of maybe not confusion, but there was quite a bit of grouping together of literacy and ABE. So we combined those together. We found that the ESL and especially study release response rates were really tricky because a lot of systems seemed to use study release programs as a way to provide ESL. And so, for example, like if Texas offers a study release program and through that study release program, students participate in ESL, they may report offering study release, but not doing ESL. And that was the biggest thing in the data that we found was that in places where there was, I think, large rates of study release, there was low rates of ESL offering. So we tried to just focus on if you're a prisoner in this system, what could you reasonably have at your discretion? And so for that reason, we ended up sort of making some cuts and combining some categories. All right, next slide, please. All right, so first, let's just look at what's happened over the past 30 years. Basically, broadly, prisons, either federal, state, or private prisons, have all increased their availability to varying degrees. Federal prisons is where you see the biggest jump, where education is more or less universally offered. And for that reason, actually, we end up dropping federal prisons from our analysis, partially because we thought that the agencies that would be most interested are probably state agencies anyway. And there's no variation in terms of federal prisons. So in all of our future analysis, we're going to focus on state and private prisons and look at them together. So we see that broadly education has increased over these. And in the next few slides, we're going to dive more into what we're seeing. Next slide, please. Okay, so we also, instead of looking at specifically, does your prison offer this? We look at the percentage of prisoners that are in prisons that offer this, and part of this is because, I'll backtrack for just a second. So we see that state institutions have seen large increases in vocational, especially in vocational and special education, whereas growth in secondary and AB has been somewhat marginal, part of that is due to the fact that there was already pretty high rates of offering. So state prisons by 2019 offered fewer educational opportunities than federal prisons, except for study release programs, which I think part of that is that study release programs aren't going to be something that the federal government necessarily is going to be super interested in, given the fact that the complications of sending prisoners off-site may be complicated. But that seems to be something that state prisons are relying significantly on. And so to move down to the last bullet point with private prisons, private prisons have made considerable gains in recent years. So the gap, for example, between state and private prisons for some of the programs is 36%. It's close to 6%. Let's see. So yeah, only 27.6% of private prisons offer programming versus much higher rates in state and federal prisons. All right, next slide, please. And so here's where I was talking about the prison size. So for all of this table on the right, instead of looking at the percentage of prisons that are offering these programs, instead we want to look at what is the percentage of prisoners that have this program within their prisons. And this is important because there's systematic differences. Larger prisons tend to offer more programs. And so therefore, even if, let's say, only 60% of prisoners have a program at their discretion, that 60% of prisons have a program. The 60% of prisons is going to house 80% or 90% of the prisoners. So in all of our future analysis, we're looking at what is the percentage of prisoners that have this specific program at their discretion. All right, next slide, please. All right, so there we go. So we looked first, so we tried to see, well, are there observable differences in terms of characteristics of the prison itself? And we're going to see that when we look at broad differences, there's some variation, but the biggest difference is simply going to be where is the prison located. But first off, let's look at the security classification level. So if we look at high, medium, and low security prisons, you see that there's some exceptions, but the general trend here is pretty high levels of education in all these programs, with some exceptions. For example, special education is offered at lower rates in medium security prisons. College is offered at lower rates at low security prisons. Study release programs are offered at relatively low rates in medium security prisons, even when compared to high security prisons, where you think that study release programs may be fairly rare. All right, next slide, please. Then we looked at male and female populations, and we found, again, there's not very much variation. So if we look at, for example, special education, again, we see that places where there's both populations has a much higher rate than male or female individually. But broadly speaking, these rates of offerings are fairly similar. So it doesn't seem to matter to a huge extent the level of security of the prison, nor does the population served in terms of male and female. Next slide. The big thing is prison location. This is by far the biggest determinant, holding everything else constant, of what is being offered in a prison. And so we see that in the South has the lowest rates of educational offering for everything except for special education. The Northeast and the Western regions had the highest educational programming for most programs, whereas the Midwest offered the highest rate of literacy training at 96.8%. So the takeaway here is probably going to be that the region, or at least the location, really, really matters. We see that systematically Southern prisons are doing a much worse job in terms of offering these programs. And I think sort of the one that's sort of the most troublesome, and the one we point out in the paper, is ESL. So Texas and Florida are both counted. They're both in the census Southern region. They both have huge numbers of ESL eligible learners, and yet it offers that program at a much lower rate. And even though they offer study release programs at a higher rate, not even that is enough to make up that difference. You can even see that 45% of programs at most offer either ESL or study release programs, which is still much lower than the Northeast, which offers ESL programs at a much higher rate. All right. Okay, so then we looked at a few criteria. Right, so we said, okay, well, there's two things we want to look at when we're evaluating states. One is simply how how much are they offering, right? Where using the data, using the census, do prisoners have access to these programs? And then two, how are they creating policies that may nurture this, right? And so the first one is implementation of automatic enrollment in educational programs or mandatory participation, right? For incarcerated people that don't meet specific benchmarks, such as, a very common one, as I'm sure many of you know, is like if you test below like a sixth grade reading level, right? If you test as functionally illiterate, many states will automatically enroll you in a program, either literacy or a GED completion program. Two, the establishment of a school district or state office overseeing public education. Now, this is the one that I think, we've gotten some pushback from other states as well. And so here I want to talk about the criteria very quickly. Basically, if there was a program that was in the Department of Corrections or within the Department of Education, then it was counted. And if not, or if we couldn't identify a program at all or an office at all, then the state did not receive a point for this. My instruction to my research assistants, and the one that I used in verifying the things that we collected, was if I was a prisoner who took a program and was released from the prison, do I think that it would be easy for me to find where to get my transcript? Right, that was sort of the colloquial sort of rule of thumb that we used. All right, and then third, good time incentives, right, which is what I mentioned on the call, a sentence reduction incentive for participation for educational programs. All right, so data for automatic enrollment and the presence of those educational bodies was compiled by looking at the DOC websites or educational websites for a variety of different for all different states. And then the National Conference of State Legislature report is where we got the rules regarding sentence reduction and good time laws. Next slide, please. All right, so what we did was we used this to create a score. And if you don't use these sort of scores very often, there's two ways in which they're extremely helpful. One of which is highlighted here. The other one will await future results. But these scores are helpful, one, obviously, in the cross-section to say, well, how are we stacking up compared to other states? And that's obviously incredibly important. And it's the only one that we can use now because this is our first report. The second one is growth over time. If you look at most, I was looking literally yesterday at measures of liberal democracy across nations, right? Those scores are really helpful because you can see how countries change over time. Similarly, one of the benefits of this measure potentially over time is how are states improving or how are they backsliding, right? So in the absence of that, since there has been no follow-up report yet, it's, of course, the most of the focus is going to be on that cross-sectional component. How do we compare to other states, right? Which we can either use as a way to say, man, why are we scoring so poorly? Or you can use as a tool to go to legislators and say, look, here's something that we can do concretely to improve both the quality of prison education, but also improve our score in this metric. So we used those three measures that I looked at in terms of policy. Each of those counted as a point. And then we looked at the percentage of prisoners that had those education programs available to them. And so I'll talk about in a second those four categories. So we used four components. One was literary or literacy programs or ABE. We combined them into one. Did a prisoner have one or the other, right? Given the fact that there could be some ambiguity. Did they have secondary education programs, so GED programs or high school programs? Did they have vocational training, and did they have college education? Right. So as I mentioned already, that means that we move. We don't address ESL, even though it's important. We don't address special education because those two are the ones that primarily seem to be used, seem to be delivered most commonly through study release programs. And so therefore using the census as it stood made it very difficult to measure those availabilities. So basically, if you were in the lowest quartile, you got 0.25 points. If you're in the second quartile, you got 0.5 points for your availability for any one of these four programs. If you're in the next quartile, 0.75, and 1 if you were in the top 25% of states in offering these programs. And then you got an additional point for if you had an office, if you had a basic administrative office overseeing prison education, if you had automatic enrollment, and if you offered sentence reductions. So this means that states could have, let me backtrack. There were 5 categories: 0, 0.25, 0.5, 0.75, and 1. So you can get anywhere between 0 and 7 points, and then we use that to score all the states. So next slide, please. All right, so here we see, so this is over, I think the next 4 slides is this, so I'll go very briefly over some of the top scoring states. One of the things that we found was that, as Andrew mentioned, this is a bipartisan issue, and so therefore it's no real surprise that there's no systematic blue-red high scores and low scores. There's ways in which blue states score high and low, and there's ways in which red states score high and low. So Ohio and California were the highest scoring states. Ohio offered very high rates of participation in three of the 4 categories. California scored pretty well on all 4 of them, and you can see it. So now, if you will, just sort of scroll through the next few slides, and we can see, and we can stop if we see when we see Maryland. Let's see. There we go. Wait, do we pass Maryland? There it is. So there's Maryland. Maryland is near the bottom in terms of its availability, and a lot of that is actually due to the fact that Maryland is below average in terms of offering 3 of the 4. And I actually looked this up. I believe it's actually 4. They're in that middle section, but I believe they're below the median in terms of all 4 availabilities. Now, again, part of that could be response rates, right? And that's a big thing that I think you could affect performance in the future. But that's one of the reasons why Maryland is close to the bottom. All right, next slide, please. All right, so I think that what this highlights is that there's a huge amount of variation. Let's see. There's a question. Okay, well, I'll get to the questions at the end, but there's a huge amount of variation in terms of availability, as I'm sure we all know, right? Where you end up being incarcerated is going to have a huge impact on what educational opportunities are available to you and what policy environments you operate in as a incarcerated student. Right, and so there are significant differences and various policies. And as we see, there's some places, including here in the South, we do the worst, right, in terms of underperforming compared to especially the Northeast Western counterparts. And part of this does reflect the long-standing policy and funding decisions. All right, next up. Okay, so states where at least 75% of prisons offer vocational training tend to support some sort of prison reduction. Tend to report inmate participation rates above 50%, right? And so we see again that availability, it does translate to increased participation. Now, what that means is that even if, as I said, some of this might be low rates of accurately reporting, if all of our variation in state level reporting was just due to the fact that some states just didn't send in the reports, we wouldn't expect this result. This suggests that even just the self-reported availability across states does track with prisoner reported participation. Okay, and again, the things that we actually thought going in, like when we wrote our proposal for funding for this, we're like, oh yeah, I'm sure, like security, even just like whether or not prisons have reports out for prisoner mistreatment, right? That those are all going to correlate. None of them really did. It's all a matter of where you are in terms of the region of the state. All right, next slide. Okay, so what are the policy implications? So one of the big things is that, so one of the things I like about the mandatory enrollment rule is that if there's a mandatory enrollment rule, that means that all prisoners upon intake have to be assessed. And I think it's actually really important because personally, one of the arguments that I found most convincing is that if you're a prisoner and if you find yourself in the prison system and you're reading at a 4th grade level, well, that's evidence that a system in your past failed you, right? Because the education system, failed you in the sense that you do not have the level of education that our education policies suggest should be delivered to you, right? And so by doing that, by filling that gap, you make sure that failure gets addressed. States should establish centralized oversight structures for prison education that promote consistency in program quality, curriculum alignment, and workforce preparation. I'm from the state of Texas, which has one of the largest state prison education systems with the Wyndham School District. And one of the things that people have told me works really well there is that it actually makes it really easy to effectively assign instructors because there are people on the ground who can identify places of points of need, or even just fill gaps, just a day or a week in advance. And so that ends up lowering the administrative costs and the educator costs of the prison systems themselves. Okay, and so I think it's fairly obvious that correctional institutions should implement structured incentive systems. And one of the big things about this is that even if, let's take the most cynical legislator out there who says, you know what, prison education doesn't do anything, right? The only reason that it looks like people the reason why people who have education are returning to prison at a lower rate is because, well, they're higher, there's something in them. There's an innate ability that makes them both more likely to engage in prison education and less likely to commit a crime upon release. Well, I would say, okay, even if you're right, we should identify those people and offer sentence reductions. If you're saying that someone who participates in prison education is at a lower risk of re-entering prison upon release, well, it shouldn't matter if prison education is the reason that they're doing that, or if it's just a sign that they're less likely. Offer the sentence reduction anyway, right? And so I think of all the policy recommendations, that's the one that stands up to scrutiny, even against somebody who says prison education doesn't do any good. All you're doing is identifying people who are less likely to return to prison. Okay, and then I think the expansion of public-private partnerships is really crucial to strengthen the vocational and post-secondary education in prisons. I'm sure I know University of Maryland is heavily involved. You mentioned the state of New York. The state of New York has a lot of partners. Bard College, the SUNY system. They're heavily involved in prison education, and I think one of the things that does is that it actually makes it, I think, more resistant to the winds of political ideology and political flavors of the month by buttressing that with outside support. And then finally, policymakers should explore further mechanisms to prioritize prison education. We all know there's lots of different ways in which prison education can help people. Not all of them are things that we're going to pick up on. Some of this is going to give people, a sense of worth. It helps them in all sorts of different ways that we've all experienced as people who have received education ourselves. All right, thank you so much.
With that, thank you. I can tell from the chat there's some discussion about how much Maryland data was collected, and I do think that Maryland should be ranking higher in terms of the number of programs that are available. So it's a matter of maybe the answers weren't given, or the census wasn't. I mean, the survey wasn't answered, and so. But I do think one thing is instructive, and I know from personal experience and all, the thing that is how highly organized correctional education is and where it's placed. I have very personal experience with Ohio over the years. I spent years going back and forth there when I was head of our association because they had lots of membership, and we evaluated their programs using the correctional education standards, and with every one of the 33 prisons, some of them several times. And I also was very experienced with Texas, more indirectly. They were the model for everybody for years, and it illustrates the bipartisanship of all this. And they are school districts, and I would define school district a little different than you would. I would define it as a school district can give diplomas, the high school diploma, great elementary school diploma, etc. And I think that's one of the things that distinguishes. In Maryland, a GED is a high school diploma by law, but they get a high school diploma anywhere, community college, whatever, when they get that GED. But we cannot give a regular high school diploma. And I know Ohio didn't give a lot of high school diplomas, but it could. And so it took people that were close and finished them without having them take the GED. I also think it has a lot more to do. I know that they have superintendents of schools who have to plan with corrections and the other agencies on their annual budgets. And so from my viewpoint, I wish you would have emphasized and developed that idea of what is a school district a little more for the study. But I think it did an amazing job in areas where I'm not aware of a lot of good studies like this, comprehensive. So I have to commend you on your attempt to get this thing going and create criteria. And we can debate whether we answer our questions on it, but the stuff you developed, I think we ought to pay a lot of attention to in terms of these criteria. So I'll stop there.
I'll just respond really quickly if that'll work. So yeah, I think like that's absolutely the way I'm thinking about it too, is that some of this is that, there is a gap, right? And so trying to close that gap is not something that we're going to be probably able to do all in one bound. And so what's been really valuable for us is getting feedback and sometimes pushback, right, from states saying, well, I think you should look at it this way or this way or this way, which is actually really helpful for helping us determine, should we when we publish the next round, which hopefully we can, hopefully we get funding and all that works, and then when the next census is published, we can then do an update. Should we then go back and reevaluate some of our scoring for this one so we can publish the two at once? Should we leave it as it is and say, listen, there's some things we could have done differently, but we're going to keep it as it is and then measure this one coming forward? But yeah, absolutely. I think you're on the right path in terms of figuring out, well, there's lots of different ways you can hammer the same nail in with a bunch of different hammers, right? How do you actually evaluate who has a hammer and who doesn't, right?
I also noticed, real quick, but of the top states, most of the centralized school systems that you rated as a school system are at the top, and the states are at the low and have no, as you rated them at least, no centralized or weak centralized system.
All right. I think we have two questions. So John had his hand up first. So John, care to share with us your thoughts or questions?
Yeah, just wondering, would it be possible for Maryland to complete that survey again? It sounds like you have all the right stakeholders on this call at least, and I'm curious where we would have ranked if we were confident that all of the answers were provided for the survey.
Not again, like at all. Because I can tell you the 4 years I've been here, I've never seen that survey.
Okay.
So that's, yeah. And I suggested in the thing that, possibly going to another source, because I know a lot of states that do not. And so it's probably going to the data people and the DEOC who do not have access to all of our partner data like I do within my own unit, and I can reach out to our partners. We also don't have our education data listed on our website for DOC, nor do our partners have detailed put on their websites either, which is why I suggested actually going straight to the source, which is to the education directors. There's multiple national nonprofit organizations that we all sit on, all 50 directors that we get surveys all the time from researchers about what we're offering in our prisons that we do, that get sent out that we all do. So I'm sure that we would be willing to do that and answer those things so that we have more of an accurate, that way you can look at a variety of sources to make sure that you're getting the most accurate data. Because yeah, that Maryland data is nowhere near correct.
Let me ask a question, Danielle and John, for both of you. Again, this is something we I don't know, between the three of us, we've probably gotten 4 or 5 calls from different states asking similar questions, right? And to some degree, when I started this with Stephen, before we brought Andrew in, we had this debate, like how far do we go out asking for data? Who do we talk to? Mm-hmm. We ultimately just decided, since we're trying to come up with a ranking, to go with just a standard system that was already in place that we could use. And I do think there is wisdom to try to go further, right, to talk to those who are actually doing it. And I guess I'm a little, I'll tell you my personal bias is I've done some surveys, and it's terribly hard to get anyone to actually take the survey or to answer it effectively and efficiently. So I just finished a statewide survey in Tennessee on police accreditation, and it took months and even like going to meetings, high level people saying, take this, take this. And, you know, I only got a handful of agencies to do it. And even then they probably handed it off to a lowly sergeant when it really should have been the chief, right? Who actually has the answers. And so, you know, so I guess the question is, if you have access and a way to help us ensure that we get good access and good quality data, I'd love to have a discussion about what else we could do, you know, either a state or national level to say, let's look at another aspect of this that we weren't able to include on the first paper and really hammer that out. So, you know, if that's something that you can, you know, take a carrot or a stick and say everyone has to answer this, we'd love to have a conversation.
So the council, the Correctional Education Association, is a national nonprofit that represents all the 50 states correctional education divisions, and they do conferences, webinars, PD stuff. But one of the things that they also have is the Council of Correctional Education Directors. So that is all the education directors for every state that sits on that council, along with the juvenile representative too. So the director of education for juvenile corrections and for adult corrections, they both sit on. And then the state can also have a representative for your counties, detention centers, and jails. So we have multiple different people sitting on that, and we get surveys from the RAND Corporation to do all the time, different researchers and stuff. I can definitely, I mean, if you're interested, connect you to our president of the council and the executive director of CEA to talk to them about it. In addition, there's COABE, the Coalition of Adult Basic Education, which I'm the director of sustainability. So we get surveys a lot. And we also have a correctional education division because we represent all adult educators, right? Whether they're behind the fence or in the community. And we also take and work with researchers. We have a whole research division. So we'll get researchers that contact us and say, hey, we help build the survey, and then we push it out to our, what is it now, 150 some thousand members, which include the directors of all the nation's correctional education and stuff.
Danielle is correct. There's you can really get CEA and COABE. But I do remember when I was the head of CEA for 29 years that even with our state directors group, it was hard to get a lot of states to answer. You get a better response rate when you go to a professional directors group like that. One of the things that I want to highlight here, because I want to ask you a question, because I think you probably went to our websites, our state websites, and to national like BJS kind of stuff to get a lot of this data. And we don't have a lot on our state websites, and that tells a lot to me that if we don't put stuff out there, then we aren't as proud of our programs as we ought to be, and we're not broadcasting them as well as we should. And we know that we're doing a lot of good things in this state. I've been around in the prisons, and worked in the prisons. Now I've been around again, meeting people. I'm still proud of some of the people in these classrooms, what they're doing. Some of them I knew before; they're still there. And it doesn't get publicized. And so we don't do a good job of publicizing. I don't think a lot of states do.
Yep. And that's because you work with so many different partners. Like, so DOCs don't provide everything, right? Like in Maryland, Department of Labor provides our adult basic ed and GED and career technical education programs. And then we have our higher ed, different colleges, universities, and then even partners that do some educational programming. So that all does not get. Now, I'm actually in the process of doing a huge website revamp. And if you go to our website, it actually has partners and connection to partners websites. But then if you go to a partner's website, they don't always have stuff on those programs. So it's, I can see where it's difficult, to get.
Do we have any other people have questions? Because
I never got my question answered, so I'm just hoping to get my question answered. So again, just to make it real short and sweet, this is a data point, and Ben, Stephen, Mr. Denny, you guys have been fantastic. I love the information that you shared. But this presentation is a data point where Ohio is awesome, Maryland's not so great, and some people are probably thinking, let's do what Ohio's doing. So before we usher along this very this very important group of people along the mindset that Maryland's not doing so great. We probably need to do it like Ohio. Is it possible to fill out your survey for you so that we can see where we actually rank in case we didn't give the information, so that we have all the right information? Because again, right now you guys are a data point.
So yeah, I think that's really important. So yeah, if I'm connected with the right people and I can say, okay, well, here's where you actually are, right?
Yep.
And let's just assume that the reason why the
There's
availability
literally only
is
two
low-
people that could provide literally all the information you need. Is Danielle Cox on this call and Rochelle Rubin on this call. They are the two highest people that operate the entire program for the entire state for
Absolutely.
both agencies. Those two people could literally answer 100%.
I think what we could do, because obviously I think what we don't want you all to have, for us to say, well, look, you all didn't fill out the survey, so whatever, like that's obviously not helpful to you, right? So, but also at the same time, right, like you could go to higher powers and say, listen, here's what we can actually do, right? That will make prison better and will look better, right? So
we're already doing the 5 things at the end. And that was the part that was kind of wild too. So your recommendations at the end, I'm like, boy, Maryland's doing 100% of your recommendations. Why did we score so low? And for me, I'm thinking it's because of that survey piece. And again, any information that's given here, these are the highest people. So the decisions that are made by this group are the ones that are going to be counted and made for Maryland. There's nobody else above this.
So let me tell you right now what I can do.
Stephen holds the keys.
I noticed on your survey on the list, I got a copy of it, so I don't have to bring up a charger. But in this is the part where you talk about school district and Ohio. Okay, I do, and it's California, and they built that up in the last 10 years. And I'm very familiar with that. And then you got some small states, Wyoming. So I don't. The small states are a little easier. Iowa is. You have Illinois, which has always had a good centralized system. New Jersey, and so the ones the ones with a school district are that did well tend to be the top, regardless of the other data problem collections you had. And I think one of the things that we're finding here in Maryland is we don't coordinate very well between our agencies, and we do a lot of good stuff. I think there's been a lot of action right now in this last year to really pull together, but we don't have a centralized. We have higher ed and public safety, which has to be there by law. We have education and labor, and we have the Maryland Department of Education that's supposed to be a partner in that. And I think we're finding that we need to make some improvements. So, however, we get this thing into a stronger agency is up to us, and it doesn't have to look like Ohio or California, but we can look at them and see how they did that. And I'm hoping that I'll come out of this with a permanent, stronger structure. That's what the name of this is: Reform Our Delivery System Commission.
Well, certainly, if after this I'm able to get the data from Danielle or whoever will have that data, and then I can look and say, okay, well, given what you have now, right? Because also that's a survey that's a little outdated at this point. Given what you have now with full reporting, here's where you would have ranked, right? And so that's absolutely. I think that's something. If you're saying that, John, that's something that would be useful to you, that's something we can do easily.
Right. So but I would say when you say. You said in the definition, or back I don't know what slide, a central school system would mean that you have an agency in a state aid. You'd have a correctional education program in a state agency, and I don't think that's a good definition for as strong a definition as you could when you say you have a strong central system. So I think that really look at that a little bit and how you'd define that.
Yeah, and kind of alluded to in her comments along those same lines, Stephen, as a matter of fact, I think.
I know Christian has had his hand up. I want to make sure he gets a chance to ask his question.
Thanks, Ainsley. No, I just want to say first, great presentation. Thank you all for the data. It was very helpful. It was helpful for me to kind of help continue to help frame our work, because for me, I have a framework of, okay, we have these 8 measures. How are we doing the 8 measures? So I would like us to kind of, follow up with that, and maybe, in our separate committees, right? Just follow up on how are we doing those measures. Like I had no idea like automatic enrollment was an issue. So I wanted to appreciate, I appreciate the presentation. They kind of help, illuminate some things I wasn't aware of.
Thank you, Christian. Yes, and we do want to get you to really help us with all this.
Just really quick, we do have automatic enrollment for mandatory education because we have a mandatory education law. So
perfect example, Danielle.
Another example.
That's a perfect example of what I'm worried about. Some people may walk away thinking that we don't have some of the things that we do have as a result of the way the presentation was put together. So, Danielle, I'll second that.
Goes back to the 1980s, as a matter of fact. We were one of the first states to really start doing that after the Federal Bureau did it. So, there must be other questions or concerns.
Another question from Ainsley, I believe.
Yeah, I was wondering if you guys could talk a little bit about what you got, like what patterns you guys are seeing from some of those top performing states. And if there's anything that we can do it in Maryland, that we can learn from those states. I'm interested in that.
Ben, do you want to take this one or you may take it?
I guess I'll let you take it, Stephen. I think it's kind of, yeah, go ahead, Stephen.
Sure. So I think, yeah, and I think, Stephen's referenced this quite a few times, is that part of this is a strong centralized structure appears to be both important in terms of establishing the policies, but then also like those policies are heavily correlated with the programs themselves. And so I think that's the biggest. So given the fact that there's actually quite a bit of variety, I think the states are doing it quite a bit differently. Texas is higher performing and it's extremely heavily centralized. California seems to be less centralized. And so I think there's actually a lot of different ways that you can do it. But it does seem like some of the lowest performing ones are the ones that are very, very, very decentralized. And again, part of it could be lower rates of reporting, like Alaska performs poorly because no one bothers filling out the survey when it comes to education, right? I know there's programs in Alaska, I've looked them up, but yet, Alaska reports 0% availability of every single education program. And I think obviously part of that is poor data, right? Or poor data that we have available to us. But I don't think it would be very high. And I think that's reflective of a very, very decentralized structure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think you give us a really good overview to start looking more and defining things better, but you give us a structure here. I know the RAND Corporation did the recidivism studies, and we're going to have Lois Davis talk to us. I've become a good friend of hers over the years when she did that study, and they had a lot of trouble getting data too. And that was the RAND Corporation with a big chunk of money at the time. I can't imagine you guys have gobs of money sitting there. And so it is difficult to get in, and Danielle has suggested ways to get this. And I really do wish, and this is to John and to Rochelle, that they get more involved with the Adult Ed Association of the state, the National Adult Ed Association, and the Correctional Education Association, because that's the profession, and that's a professional group. And you'll learn things from each other doing that you're not aware of if you just stay insular. And so I think that's important. And so, and Danielle can really help you. She, as you can tell from Danielle, if you ask her to do a survey, she's going to call everybody under the sun, and then she's going to light a little fire under them when they don't. So,
if I can add just one more thing as we come to a close, Stephen, just real quick. So I want everyone to know and appreciate your feedback. This is actually something we care quite a bit about. So Andrew spent most of his research career dealing with issues in jails and prisons. Stephen has actually taught classes in prisons and did the main research on this. I write grants for local jails and prisons to bring in education programs and things like that. So this is all something we care deeply about. And, my quick suggestion and takeaway is, we want you to use this research as tools, right? I want you to be able to go to the governor, whoever. In fact, I'll put a quick link in here for the previous paper we did that talks about you know, the impact of education and how it can save you money, right? And you can use that as a tool to say, listen, we need to do this because it saves us money, which is why we need to ask for money, right? Or you can go to and say, even, you know, there may be some errors perhaps in how we did this as far as the data that was available. And you can go into your legislature and say, listen, we really score higher than this in these 2 areas. They didn't find it, but this one area, let's use this report as a catalyst, right, to move this one area forward in all of this. All the research that the 3 of us do isn't highly theoretical. It's driven for a purpose, right? To move the needle forward, to make a difference. And so, you know, we're happy to help anybody in that effort. You know, we've talked about, I feel like I miss every year the submission date for some of these conferences to go into the ones that you mentioned to share this or with others. And so hopefully we've given you all some tools or some thoughts that will help you, right, to continue moving everything forward. And that's our, you know, ultimate goal and desire, both as individuals and together with you all to really move the needle on some of these things. So I just wanted to mention real quick that's a little reflection of who we are. We're not, you know, sometimes academics get a bad name. We walk in and we ask for data and we leave. We're really trying to move the needle on this and hopefully get some more education, get folks, you know, educated, released to have better lives. That's really our goal here. So still happy to answer more questions if you have more time, but I know we're getting close. So I want to just kind of provide a quick summary of everything.
And if I could piggyback really quickly on this. So Danielle, you've mentioned a few things that I think are really, really important that I'm going to be chewing on for a while. And so one of the things you mentioned is, you know, could there be a different way of getting this information? Obviously, like sort of saying, you know, create a new survey, that's tricky, but you know, the survey that we've been using is a survey of correctional facilities, right? So that is everything in the correctional facility, of which education is just a part, right? So I think I'm intrigued. Like, there's always like what is the cost of doing this? But I'm intrigued by is there a way that, you know, even with the resources that we have available, for us to actually get this information directly from people, not who are working for, you know, with the Department of Corrections and have all these other things going on, versus focus specifically on prison education, because I think, you know, the trade-off there is, I think, pretty clear. You may not get every state, but the quality of data you get from all the states you get data from will be richer, right? I think that's unambiguously true, right? There is a tension there, right? Completeness of data, the breadth versus the depth of data. But I think I'm really intrigued by that idea, given how much I've had to say, hey, this federal data, like, there's gaps in it, right? Like, and that stinks to have to say. Yeah. And, you know, I think, you know, you're seeing, you have a vision here of there's a different way to do it. I think that's super interesting. So I'm all about like pursuing that more.
Yeah. They're going directly to the prison itself. I mean, there's how many prisons across the United States, right? And our wardens at the prisons do not have, if they go just to the principal, they're not going to have data on all of our partners and what they do. They're only going to have on what they specifically do, like Department of Labor's data, right? And then, but not the colleges, other educational partners, other educational programs. The wardens don't know that. So if they're just answering it based on that, you know, they're not going to be able to get all that data. So if it came to the actual 50 directors, right, we have all that, and then we can reach out to our partners and get that, or send them, you know, the survey to help fill out and that sort of thing. Because the states don't all, corrections doesn't ever in any state do all their education. It is always sourced out to different partners. So.
Yeah. One of the last things I'm going to comment on, we should probably draw this, the federal thing, they left it out. I spent a lot of time in the last 10 or 15 years, not until the last 5 years, let's say 10 years before that, trying to work with the Federal Bureau of Prisons and being involved with some national pressure on them. They say they have all these programs, and they'll tell you they have all these programs, but we have plenty of testimony from people coming out who are incarcerated, who I tell you give you really good information if you ask them the right questions, and with people who are a little upset with the system they're working in. There's not a lot of people attending these programs, and the programs, you know, are there on paper, but, you know, depending on the warden, and because teachers are also correctional officers, and when there's a shortage of correctional officers, the teachers go do that, and there's all kinds of other problems. And so I wouldn't rely too much on the Federal Bureau of Prisons data. I worked for them for 2 years. I was transferred over there from Maryland to run grant programs for a couple of years in the 80s, and it's an army. It's set up like an army, and it's very disciplined, and you can get the data, but it's the data they want to give, and it's very difficult. So somebody from the Federal Bureau of Prisons would probably tell me I'm full of malarkey, but I mean that's a take of everybody that's been working with them for a number of years. Okay. So anyway, any more questions, Angie? I'm gonna turn it back to you, and then we'll. I'm sorry we took this thing over. I thought this was important. It correlates with the name of our commission. You know, we're looking at delivery systems, and this is the best that's going on out there, and really good survey to get started. And it certainly caused a lot of discussion with us. And that's.
I did have one last question, Stephen. Who selected for Mr. Stickle, Mr. Schuster? Who selected this group to present to us today? Just curious.
Angie is doing some research on what's out there, and this is what's out there.
Yeah, and we did have conversations beforehand. I think that this is a really, even if there are questions about the data, there's always going to be, surveys. It's kind of pulling teeth to get data, so we understand that there are some, holes when it comes to and limitations. But I do think that this is a good, jumping off point for this commission to kind of frame our discussions going forward about prison education, what we can learn from other states, what maybe we can teach to other states. So I just really want to thank again the professors for spending the time with us today, the work that you guys are doing on this issue. It's really important. As I'm sure everybody here knows, prison education is our guiding star, and we're really grateful to have, people looking into it. All of the resources from today.
Ainsley, I want to thank you because I think it shows us if researchers looking at data that's not complete or that we have not, seen, that's important to know so that we can make sure that we're included and accurately. So thank you. I appreciate that. And thank you to everybody who presented.
Yeah, and I think Andrew and Stephen are participating in programs in the prisons. They have their own personal experience. And I found out that means to me that you guys will probably want to continue doing this research. It's not a one-time, you got a grant, let's do it, and then do whatever else. So I appreciate that. And just one more thing, John, to answer your question a little bit, all the research I've seen over years, there's never been anything quite like this to start looking at overview. So this is the first one I'm aware of, and Ainsley discovered it, and I appreciate that because we just don't have a lot of overview.
Yeah, and as far as we know, this could be the only comprehensive nationwide review and analysis done. And again, and I guess it would go without saying as well that, and Stephen, you kind of brought up some concerns about getting the data back and getting responses from the stakeholders that are involved. At the end of the day, too, it all depends on the stakes that are there for the people that you're asking as well. I'll tell you, if you guys came to us 2 years ago and there was no PEDR and you were simply asking for information as a third party, I don't know how high we would put you on our priority list for responding, to be honest with you, without the governor directing us to do so. I got to tell you, in this forum right here, it is very important that we get it right. I got to tell you that the stakes are very high, and currently we're the only state that does it the way that we do it, and we've got evidence that other states are doing it better in a different method or a different structure. Stakes are high, and I want to make sure we get it right. So I'm definitely looking forward to looking at that survey. I'm curious as how we would end up if we were to take a look at that survey and actually fill out all the information, because it's important for us to know as well, where we would really land if we had the opportunity to provide the information that's required. But I think that everything else, I think this is great. And I look forward to seeing that survey. This is all good information, all valid information. I just want to make sure that we are able to provide the most up-to-date information.
Yeah, John's absolutely right. And this all highlights how difficult it is to go to a state and get somebody to answer a survey without having to go through 15 different permissions. And, well, what does this mean for us? And what if we answered the wrong way? And how do we look? It's very difficult. So I think you've done a commendable job pulling teeth out of 50 different states.
Really?
So so with that, let's just wrap this up. Are there any other folks who have comments for today? Or I've had a lot of people stay on, and we're a half hour past our time. And there's our people with big jobs besides this. So it shows how devoted everybody is to this commission's work and how we're working together. I think we're going positively. We have our differences, but we're focusing on doing better for all of us. So with that, I guess I'll ask if anybody wants to adjourn the meeting, make a recommendation. And Danielle, you can't because you made a recommendation already on one vote. So somebody else, please.
This is Christian. I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Thank you, Kristen.
I will second it. This is Ann.
Okay. All right, everybody have a great, wonderful day, and we'll see you next month. And a lot of you in between. And thank you guys again. You're doing terrific work.